We were looking last week in the study about the vision that John saw, the experience he had on the island of Patmos. And we were talking about what is at the centre of heaven. Now, obviously, God is at the centre of heaven, but also we see that there's a throne at the centre of heaven and that God is on a throne. And we see this same picture in Daniel chapter 7. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow, and half of his hair was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all set ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out before him. So we see Daniel sees this vision, and he sees this throne. We see the same thing in the book of Ezekiel, when Ezekiel has a vision in Ezekiel chapter 1. In the book of Ezekiel chapter 1, it's the same thing. Ezekiel chapter 1 verse 26. Above the expanse over their heads was what looked like a throne of sapphire, and high above the throne was a figure like that of a man. So we see another throne in the book of Ezekiel, and we see the same thing in the book of Revelation. Here we are, Revelation chapter 4 verse 3. And at once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven and someone sitting on it. So at the centre of everything there's a throne. Now why is that? Why does God want us to know that? Did he reveal that to these prophets and servants of his? Usually at the beginning of the message they had to bring, often it was the first thing they saw before they brought their message, or it was before some great revelation. There would be this vision and they would see the throne. You see, we have to understand, we have to have an understanding of the fact that God is at the centre of everything. That God is the ultimate ruler of the universe. However it may appear, however chaotic things may appear on earth from time to time, it's God who is the one who is on the throne. God is the one who ultimately is the source of all authority, who's ruling and reigning, and who is always in that position of being on the throne. God is never out of control. He's never not ruling the universe. He's never not in charge of the universe. He is the sovereign. He is the king, the Lord over the universe. And for us, we need to know that, because for our security, we need to understand that God is firmly in charge. Whatever else may be going on around us, however else it may appear to us, when we see heaven, when we have a vision, when we go beyond the veil and see the other side of the veil, we see that it's actually God who is in charge, God who is ruling on the throne, God who is the sovereign, who is the supreme ruler. Now, God may allow men to have free reign for a limited period. He may, in his sovereignty, allow them to do things, but he is the one who is the permanent ruler of the universe. At the heart of the universe, there is a throne. And the throne symbolizes kingship. It symbolizes sovereignty. It symbolizes rulership, lordship. All of those things it symbolizes. It symbolizes the ultimate authority. In the ancient world, we don't have kings so much now. We have more like prime ministers. But in the ancient world, empires and kingdoms would have a king, and the king would be the final authority, but the king would be the one whose word was final, whose decrees stood, who was the ultimate authority, and he was the one who ruled over his kingdom. And so this is the picture we have in the book of Revelation, the book of Daniel, the book of Ezekiel, and other places in the Bible, where God establishes in the heart of the prophet or the the saint or the intercessor or whoever it is, God establishes in their heart this principle at the beginning, right from the beginning. And sometimes these visions were overpowering for the people who received them, because seeing God in glory and authority and understanding who God is can be, a bit overwhelming. When we have an encounter with God and we realize the glory of God, the power of God, the authority of God, when we actually realize, maybe for the first time ever, who God really is, that he's not some, lackey or, Santa Claus, but he's a potentate. He's a ruler. He's the king of the universe. I remember a visitation I had with the Lord many, many years ago, and the power of the Lord and the presence of the Lord was manifest in a meeting I was in. And people were literally were dumbstruck. They couldn't speak, and they sat in silence for an hour because they were aware of the supreme presence of God, and they realized they were in the power of somebody who was extremely awesome and powerful and mighty. And they realized that the best thing you could do in the presence of somebody like that was to keep your mouth shut. There wasn't a lot you could say. They were basically people overawed by the presence of God. So we need to know that. We need to understand that. We need to have a confidence in who God is. Because in the world, in this temporary setup, there are ebbs and flows. There are times when it appears that evil is prevailing. There are times when, it swings the other way. But this is a transient, temporary setup. And it's not the reality behind everything. The book of Revelation it reveals the reality behind everything. It reveals the eternal realm. There's one of my favorite scriptures is that which is seen is temporal, that which is unseen is eternal. See, we live in a temporal realm. We have a limited amount of time, and the things around us are subject to decay and change. But eternity, where the realm of God doesn't change. The realm of heaven doesn't change. It's an unchangeable realm. God is always the sovereign in heaven. And we need to have our feet firmly planted in that sovereignty. Not only that, of course, but one of the interesting things about the book of Revelation is that there were 24 elders who were also seated on thrones. And this really shows that God is inviting man to share in his rulership of the earth. God placed man to be the steward and to monitor and to rule in the earth. But man messed it up. But God restored man's authority through Christ in the earth, so that man can now share in that rulership. And so we see that there are also the angels, and there are other beings in heaven, living creatures and various things in heaven. And all of these are focused around the throne. Even the thrones of the 24 elders, they are subordinate and secondary to the throne of God. In fact, we see that the elders get off their thrones and they fall on their knees before God and they worship God. So their thrones are only a secondary, or a they are only secondary rulership, type of rulership to the rulership of God, and it's subjected to God. Their thrones are subjected to the one throne that's in the center of the universe. So I just wanted to share that. I hope you grasp something of what I'm trying to put across. And the next time we're going to look at the nature of the one on the throne. Because it's one thing to know that somebody's on the throne, but we want to know, what's that person like who's on the throne? Obviously, if that person is a dreadful tyrant and dictator and a merciless person, it's not really very good for us if we're going to be living under that kind of regime. So I want to look at, in the next study, at the nature of the one on the throne. But the first principle we need to grasp is that God is sovereign. He's the Lord of all, and he's the ruler of everything. And that's one of the keys to understanding the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation reveals who truly has the power and the authority, who truly is in charge, who ultimately has the final say in everything. So bless you, and I'm going to leave it there for today.